Hello everyone and welcome to the 2020 RTPI South East President's Visit. I'm Laura Archer, I'm a planner at Barton Willmore, Chair of the South Coast Young Planners Network and RTPI Young Planner Trustee. So I'm chairing today's session with the Young Planners President Visit, Come Dine with the President. I've been really excited about this and hence why we're all dressed up. I'm also joined today by fellow young planners who sit on committees across the South East region. So if I could just go around everyone and just quickly introduce yourselves and what committee you represent. So I'll start with Suzi.
Hiya, I'm Suzi. I am a member of the Thames Valley Young Planners Committee. I am a senior planner at Bidwells.
Thanks, Suzi. Harriet?
Hi, I'm Harriet Richardson. I'm an associate planner at Batcheller Monkhouse and I launched and chair the Kent Young Planners Committee and sit on the RTPI South East RAC.
Thanks, Harriet. Annabel?
I'm Annabel Lohe and I'm a senior planner at Storey Homes, an SME house builder based in Milton Keynes, and I sit as the chair of the Thames Valley Young Planners Steering Committee.
Thank you. Nick?
Hi, I'm Nick Webb. I'm a graduate planner at Batcheller Monkhouse, and I'm here representing Kent Young Planners along with Harriet.
And last but not least, Simon.
Simon Kennedy, currently a regeneration project manager at Havant Borough Council and vice chair of the South Coast Young Planners Committee.
Thanks, Simon. And welcome Sue Manns, our guest of honour. I really appreciate you being here. I think it's really good to have young planners to have time with the President. And I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself, they don't need to, and to give us an update on Plan the World We Need To.
I will do, and thank you ever so much for inviting me. I think the Young Planners sessions are the best of the lot that I do, and it's just fantastic. Each one I've been to, and I'm sure this will be absolutely no exception, that just leaves me really bouncing and inspired and wishing I was 40 years younger than I am. That's not going to happen, but and it's great that you've got the Come Dine with me. It's so different and it'll be really good fun. But before we get onto the fun bit, you set me a task, didn't you, which is talking about Plan the World We Need. So that's what I'm going to do. So the world we live in today is in so many ways very, very different to the one that we were experiencing in January 2020. And my inauguration speech back in January 2020 really did not have a pandemic mentioned as one of the challenges that we would be facing this year. So whilst global challenges like climate change haven't gone away, our focus as a profession over the year changed dramatically. And in March, April and May, we responded to the immediate threat of COVID-19. And we were very resilient and very adaptable in the way that we did that. Sadly, during that lockdown period, many lives were lost and continue to be lost. And many families and businesses have been affected and will continue to be affected. And that applies to many of our members. But life as we knew it in 2019 won't return. I think we all accept that, but we will recover and we need to plan for that recovery. So looking forward, the plans, the policies and the actions that we put in place now, we need to support that greener place-based recovery that responds not only to the lessons learned from the pandemic, but also to the challenges that we were grappling with this time last year, most notably climate change. These have not gone away. And unlike the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had ample notice of these challenges. So it's vitally important that we plan now for the world that we want and that we need. The future that we have will be the future that we choose. So on the 29th of June at the Planner Live online, I launched the RTPI's campaign, Plan the World We Need. The launch was accompanied by a report, cunningly also named Plan the World We Need, which reflects on the health and economic impacts of COVID-19, whilst reminding us, as I mentioned earlier, that the climate environmental crisis has not gone away. So the campaign is targeted at UK governments, the media, stakeholders, influence, indeed anybody who's got an interest in the future of our places and spaces. Its purpose is to promote the key role of planners and planning in creating a better, greener, post-COVID-19 world. Hashtag Plan the World We Need. Planners and a place-based decision-making approach are necessary to guide economic stimulus post-COVID in order to maximise investment in public and active transport, resilient, healthy placemaking, renewable energy and smart grid technology, resilient infrastructure, climate mitigation, investment in communities, a national programme of building retrofit, and the right housing in the right places. So the campaign also calls for the proper resourcing of the planning system and for planners to address the effects of austerity, which has resulted in underfunding for a decade. Without planners, the government risks not being able to meet its ambitious carbon emissions target. So, our Plan the World We Need campaign has just passed its first 100 days. And its impacts are already being felt. The influence of the RTPI's campaign on the white paper, Future of Planning, which was published in August 2020, is evident, not least as it is used to actually frame one of the sections. Pillar 2 of the white paper, Planning for Beautiful and Sustainable Places, opens with the Plan the World We Need highlighted as a key part of the context for the vision, and I quote, "Recent research from the Royal Town Planning Institute has set out the vital contribution that planning can make to a sustainable and inclusive recovery." The framing of this section supports the wider ambitions for planning, closely echoing the key goal of the campaign. Much of the language in the white paper, once you put aside the political rhetoric at the start, is very supportive of planning having a holistic remit, seeking to achieve more than just narrow development management. Separately, the government produced a thank you note to key contributors to the white paper, and it mentions the Number 10 Planning Commission, as well as research and reports published by leading commentators, including, most recently, reports from the Royal Town Planning Institute, Centre for Cities and Policy Exchange. On top of that, there has also been significant interest in the campaign from MPs and from Lords. Campaign language has been used to frame meeting requests, and the documents have been used alongside white paper analysis for our engagement with parliamentarians. And just a few of the highlights. Baroness Andrews used the RTPI Build, Build, Build letter as the basis for a speech in the Lords, and referenced the RTPI's work in this area. And she supported our criticism of planner bashing, newt counting, and encouraged government to work closely with us. Baroness Thornhill, Lord Best, Lord Randall, and other members of the House of Lords supported the campaign themes in their work in Parliament. Our briefings on Plan the World We Need have been widely shared among MPs and Lords, with numerous engagements with the content and meeting requests. The official House of Commons library briefing on planning reforms, prepared for use by MPs and Lords in the Chamber, features the RTPI as the most referenced and quoted organisation. And it includes reference to Plan the World We Need report, and also quotes the Build, Build, Build RTPI letter at great length. And finally, just to sort of wrap up the 100 days, you've probably seen a lot on the RTPI website in terms of the research papers that have been published by the policy team since the launch of the campaign, and they all fit in and bolster that campaign. And the slide there just shows some of the campaign highlights that we've gone through over this 100 days. So finally, our consultation response to the white paper, Planning for the Future, which is due to be submitted at the end of October, is going to champion the key messages of #Plan the World We Need campaign to ensure that planning is reflected as a key pillar in achieving social equality, health and well-being, sustainable transport, and mitigating and adapting to climate change. The messages of the RTPI Plan the World We Need campaign have a resonance across communities, across nations, and across the world. So the campaign is the start of a conversation with communities, businesses, stakeholders, the media and governments alike, as we promote the vital role of planners and planning in creating a better, greener, place-based recovery. And I very, very much hope that when we look back to 2020, whether it be in 2025, 2030, or well beyond, that we can all look back on what has changed and say that we made a difference. So thank you very much for that chance to share the 100 days of Plan the World We Need campaign.
Thanks very much, Sue. It was really good to hear that update. It's really inspiring. And like you say, I think a lot of members always, want the RTPI to be lobbying on behalf of their opinions. And like you say, all we've seen is the hashtag Plan the World We Need. So it's been a really good year. Does anyone have any comments or questions on that?
All I can say is make sure every opportunity that you have, you raise awareness of that campaign, because the more people hear it, the more they listen, and the more it puts the RTPI and professional planners and the planning process on that map, and it starts that conversation. And once you start that conversation with people, they get it. They understand why planning's important for them and for their children and children's children, going all the way back, because the decisions that are taken now are going to outlive, certainly me, they'll outlive you, they'll outlive your children, and hopefully in 100 years time someone will look back in the way we do on the new towns and the work of Ebenezer Howard and people like that and say, they were pretty good at that, weren't they? That's what I want to do.
Definitely. Thanks, Sue.
I've just got one question. It's just about the different pillars of the planning for the future, and obviously it's amazing that the RTPI report is the focus of Pillar 2. And looking at Pillar 1, working for a house builder and the core focus really of standard method and achieving these very ambitious targets of 1 million new homes by the end of the Parliament, circa 300,000 a year. I just wondered what your view was on the focus placed on Pillar 1 kind of opposed to Pillar 2 and 3, and the fact that maybe the attention has been drawn to that, whether that is right or whether there should be a bit more of a renewed enthusiasm for the other pillars as well.
Right, very personal view, because the RTPI has obviously been out. You've seen the regional roundtables that we've done. You've seen there's been a whole load of various meetings with policy committees, etc. There was a big discussion at General Assembly last week. So at the moment, the team are really beavering away, trying to pull things together, because as in planning, it's, we talk about the planning balance. We're having to deal with that planning balance in terms of the way we frame responses. So the way it's going to be will be a sort of constructive dialogue. We want to be inside the tent when, and be talked to and listened to. So your question, I think it's interesting. If I take a sort of step back and I look at the first part of the white paper, there's a lot of political rhetoric, I'd call it. Which reads from a certain direction, we've got to start all over again, radical. But actually, when you get further on into pillars 2 and 3, how radical actually is it? And the big thing to me is I think it really beefs up the planning profession. It really talks about the importance of planning. It recognises the importance of planners actually being able to do that planning and to be freed through technology. So I think there's a tremendous amount in it for us as a profession. We've got to try and strike that balance in terms of how we respond. So I think I'd say watch this space on the comments on the different, how do you call them? We can't call them zones, allocations or areas that are described. And I think, again, it's interesting because to me, it's really more a green paper than a white paper. A white paper often has a lot more detail in it than this has. And what's that old phrase? The devil is in the detail. Yeah. Well, the detail isn't really quite there yet. So what a chance to actually shape that detail and try and then make or deliver something that does work for as many people as possible and hopefully achieves the aspirations of getting those homes there. So it's a bit of a difficult balancing out for a whole of a white paper with all those questions to answer. But I will say just one more thing. The first question that asks, what 3 words would you use to describe the planning system? Now, if I had a choice, if I had an extra question I could add to the white paper, I would add a final question, and it would be, having read the white paper proposals, what 3 words would you now use to describe the system? And I would like to see whether there's been a change in those 3 words. And in fact, even if people, when they get to that end question, go back and think, well, actually, I might reflect on what I put as my initial response. Yeah. So that would be my bit.
Yeah, that is good, adding that reflection. Yeah, I think that would be really useful.
You do change, don't you, when you get to the end of something and you've gone through it. So
yeah.
So what would your words be before and after?
Oh my goodness.
That a bit unfair.
As president, I'm not putting it. I would encourage everyone to put it, contribute to the responses in every way. But because of being president, I can't do that. So I'm fully behind the RTPI one, and I'm not sure that they're actually going to answer that particular question.
I don't think they are.
So, but personal words, I'd have to think, because I think they change by the day.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Hard to sum up in 3 words sometimes, but.
Oh, yes. Definitely. But I think probably I would, in terms of where I'd like planning to be, it's positive, it's inclusive, and it delivers. And it delivers in the same way we talk about in Plan the World We Need. In fact, probably I'd like to pick that up and give it to them and say, here's my 3 words. Plan the world we need.
Yeah, that's good. Any more questions?
If I can jump in. I was going to ask, what do you foresee being achievements in the next 100 days?
Good question.
I think it would be to see others start to really push what we're saying in Plan the World We Need, so it continues to grow exponentially. And that slide that I put up towards the end had all the achievements and all the way it had been spread on. Everything has to start, and it almost grows like that, sort of an inverted pyramid. So it starts from the bottom and then it goes up. And I just want that to cascade, because the more people talk about Plan the World We Need, the more it falls into natural conversation and becomes accepted. And so I think really that's what I'd wanted to see, is grow exponentially and become mainstreamed in terms of conversations across all governments. And it's not just relevant to the UK, although it's targeted at UK governments. It has relevance across the world. And I know that certainly in South Africa, I've done a podcast with South African planners, and there they have looked at our Plan the World We Need document and said, wow, this is really good. This is what we need to do. So that's what I want to see.
Yeah, brilliant. I think we could keep asking you questions all evening on this, but I'll just move on to the next section. So we're going to just go around from representatives of the committees. So I'm going to start with Annabel from the Thames Young Valley. And what we just want to get from this section really is just, what you've been doing in your network, and also the benefits of being on a Young Planner committee.
Yeah, to start with, the Thames Valley network covers Buckinghamshire, Berkshire and Oxfordshire. So quite a big remit, and in fact Milton Keynes, where myself and Suzi reside and work, is right at the tip of that network. And so we've been looking to kind of grow our influence in this area, but also in Oxford and Reading as 2 prime sort of the other poles sort of our network, and try and include as many people as we can. And part of that sort of focus for the coming year or so, we'll also be looking at the apprentices that the RTPI has brought in, and that are valued members of our community of young planners. And we have an apprentice on our steering group, and we really value her input so much, and she'd love to go out and recruit more people to come and join in. So that's one of our main focuses going forward. And also we're looking at encouraging more local authority young planners to become part of our group. And really the benefits for them is making these other connections, learning from many different perspectives, and from, like myself, from a house builder, a developer, but also from consultants who deal with many different challenges and different types of agents. And we really are trying to look at their regeneration plans. In Slough, for example, is one of our upcoming events, and get as diverse a network as possible. So really for us, the benefits of joining our group is to meet hopefully that diverse network, and to really boost the South East name as well, understanding Oxford, Reading and Milton Keynes, some of the brilliant achievements of those cities, and to share that with a group of like-minded, although not always, you never know, you might have your views challenged, young people who are supportive and a kind group of people.
Thanks very much, Annabel. I'll just move on to Simon from the South Coast Young Planners, and we'll come to questions at the end.
Thank you. Yeah, certainly been an interesting year for the South Coast Young Planners Network. Obviously, once lockdown started, there was a prevalence of national CPD events. The RTPI themselves moved, where things were so accessible, moved to a more national offer. So this year we've been concentrating on CPD for local issues in the Solent region. Many of you may have heard of it. We've had an interesting issue with nitrates entering protected sites. So we've been doing some bespoke webinars based on that issue. At the beginning of the year, we were organising Planning Sans Frontières, which is a great party, a great event, and unfortunately the lockdown situation stops that, but we are very much hoping to take that forward next year. So for in the interim period, much like Annabel, we're looking at expanding our base of steering group members, getting some new blood in with a number of positions available if anybody watching this is interested, and then looking forward to next year to either continue to offer localized, interesting CPD events, or indeed to start getting back into getting people together, getting people communicating, and then interested again, and hopefully Planning Sans Frontières, because I always have a great time and would love to be able to organise that again. But yeah, certainly an interesting year, but we've still been managing to put together a programme of local information, and looking forward to next year for sure.
Thanks very much, Simon. Harriet from Kent Young Planners.
Yeah, I was also going to use this, as Simon has, as a bit of a bid to try and get other people to join. I think we're one of the younger groups. We started about 4 years ago now. I launched it with Tom, who also does a lot. He's sort of a co-chair. And we had just got our steering group up to quite decent numbers, and suddenly various people are moving away or just have too many commitments. So we would love to see a few more people joining. I would love to kind of hand over the leadership of that to someone else, having done it for quite a few years now. I feel like it would really benefit from a sort of fresh leadership on that. So same as Simon, really, if anyone's watching this and is in the Kent area, whether you work or live in Kent, it kind of doesn't matter if you live in Kent and work elsewhere. A lot of the events are evening events. So yeah, we'd love to have people joining, really. We've been doing as much as we can with the new Kent Planning School. Well, it's not that new now, but they launched, I think, 2 years ago now. So we've been trying to do lots of joint events with them as well, just so that we can kind of equally promote each other. But in terms of a benefits point of view, I think there are endless benefits. It's one of those things that kind of spirals. You join this committee and then you get invited to another committee and another committee, and I've had so many opportunities have kind of stemmed from this, and it's meant we've been involved in some amazing things like this. We've done other kind of presidents' tours in the past, and things like the RTPI dinner, which was kind of resurrected after years of not happening. We got involved with that. So there's loads of opportunities, and it's great fun, really good way to meet people, good way to get public sector and private sector to mix, and kind of, you know, build up those sorts of relationships. So yeah, I'd really encourage people to join, whether it's Kent or somewhere else.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you, Harriet. I just echo that, especially for obviously recent graduates in the area, you know, looking for work. It is a great way to grow your network, get your profile out there, and get a great support network. So thank you. I
was just going to add that for students as well. So we talk in planning schools. I'm sure each network does that, as Harriet sort of alluded to. And I think it's never too early. You should get out there, grow your network, and it will also help with your research and dissertations. We're generally a friendly bunch, and willing to help, and I think that's something I've been advocating, and I think that we all should try to do and get some of that fresh enthusiasm into all of the groups.
Definitely. Sue, do you have any questions?
Yeah, if I can just say, what a fantastic ad for young planners that was. That was brilliant. And when I joined the RTPI branch many years ago, we didn't have a young planners network, but we almost had one de facto, because as young planners, we actually started doing our own socials, and the people that I met through that, I still see an awful lot of, and some of them are amongst my really best friends. So it is a fantastic way just to build your professional network, but also your friendship network. So I've got one question, if I may. Is this the first time you've all come together, or do you actually now, through the power of virtual technology, you get my words right, virtual media, digital technology, are you able to have events that actually bring you all together?
I think a lot of us have met various members at other events. We haven't done a full joint event yet, or certainly not one that I'm aware of, although we did all kind of group together in something that Laura headed up in a bid to host the conference, which we didn't get, but hopefully one day.
Yeah, one day.
Yeah, I think that, and a lot of that was done virtually in this COVID situation, with quite a large group of young planners from the steering committees coming together with their ideas, and I think very much being supportive. But also, I mean, you talk about making friendship connections. Myself and Suzi are hopefully going for steak tomorrow night, so we try and hang out as well, socially, and I think that's true of a lot of the people in our network of making some of those connections that you might not have done if you were sat in your individual companies and not really knowing how to reach out, especially in a time when things can be a bit more lonely for younger people who potentially live on their own, and need to make some new connections.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in picking up on that support network. When I spoke to the London Young Planners, that was something that really, really came through, the way they valued that support between each other. So fantastic.
Yeah, I think going from what Harriet said on the bid, I think from working together with all the committees as a bid, we've now got aspirations, hopefully, to hold like just a one-day conference with everyone involved, just ourselves on the South East. But obviously that was planned for this year, but obviously it will be pushed back to next year. So that is something that we can all work on together, which would be good.
That sounds absolutely brilliant.
So yeah, well now, this is for me, I'm really excited to introduce the next segment. So we're going to go around and ask our young planners from each of the committees, if you had to invite 5 dream planners to your dinner party, who would they be? So I'm going to start with Harriet. Oh, you're on mute, Harriet.
Try again.
It's always the way.
Right, is the screen working?
It's just still loading.
Okay.
There we go. Brilliant.
My internet's not the best, so hopefully this will go okay. So Sue, I did warn the others that my first person I go into a fair bit of depth in, but then I kind of whiz through the others, so don't panic if I'm moving through the first slide slowly. The first person that I would want to invite is Jaime Lerner, who he's got many kind of strings to his bow, being an urban planner, architect and politician. He's a Brazilian politician and was mayor of Curitiba for a number of years, as well as being a lecturer. And I would invite him because he had some pretty wacky ideas in ways to sort of address planning issues and kind of social issues in Curitiba specifically. And I actually first read about him during my GCSE geography coursework, and he was one of the first people that kind of brought planning to my attention. So he's been quite a key character in my career. Real person. But he did a number of different quite unusual approaches to addressing issues in his city that I was just going to run through a few that I thought were kind of the most interesting. One of them was he created these lighthouses of knowledge around the area, and there was a big issue with lack of education, particularly in the slum areas, and these lighthouses of knowledge were kind of put in place to level the playing field, really, and provide access to education through library books, internet access, professionals that could assist with job applications, and kind of get people who may otherwise not have any access to education and access to the kind of job market into jobs, particularly jobs working in the city, whether that was working in the extensive parks and gardens, or even working in more of a kind of government role. And I thought that was a really nice idea, not only to kind of get people obviously into education, which is extremely important, but these lighthouses up around the city kind of providing these like pillars of light in an area where there was extreme poverty. One of his more well-known things was the speedy bus system, which he set up as a way to, they were looking at other systems for introducing public transport to the city, and this way saved a huge amount of money, and it was essentially articulated buses, which weren't really a thing before. Jaime, I think he worked with Volvo to get them up and running, and they were buses which each carry 270 passengers, and they were really low cost and efficient transport around the city. Jaime was really against car usage. That was one of the things that he was really trying to promote, is public transport and make sure that it was accessible for everyone and affordable for everyone. And I think he's been really successful in that. He also did these sort of clear up schemes, one of which was in slum areas where the streets were too narrow to get sort of waste collection vehicles through there. So he set up a scheme where people could bring bags of waste and swap them for groceries, which was obviously feeding people, but also a really effective recycling method and way of kind of clearing up these very unhygienic kind of slum areas. He did a similar scheme in a fishing bay clear up as well, where the government would pay fishermen, particularly in seasons where they wouldn't catch as many sort of profitable fish, where they could swap bags of rubbish for money, which obviously benefited them and was a really cost-effective and sensible way of kind of clearing up the bay. And the final one I wanted to mention, just because I thought the idea of municipal sheep was quite nice. Curitiba has one of the highest park areas in the out of all cities. I think per capita it's got the largest amount of park space, but they were struggling to afford the vehicles and the fuel to maintain all of this parkland, and so he introduced municipal sheep, which kind of maintained the land, but also all of the wool from the sheep is sold to fund children's education projects. So I just kind of like the way that he would think each project had a lot of benefits to it, really, and everything was about bringing his local people together to try and reinvest and re-educate and benefit the local area specifically, rather than kind of outsourcing everything. These are a couple of quotes of his, but yeah, the car is the cigarette of the future kind of shows how anti-car he is. But also, I think the fact every city in the world can be improved in less than 3 years, I mean, that's quite ambitious, but I think true, and I think the pandemic has really shown that. I've personally seen some major changes that have taken place in our town that cropped up pretty much overnight in a response to the pandemic, a lot of which are things that we've kind of been petitioning for years, and they've never really happened. So I think if you're determined enough, you can make really major changes in a short space of time. So he would be my first guest. I couldn't not include Victoria Hills as obviously Chief Executive of the RTPI. I know I won't really go through her previous career because I think most people will be familiar with that. She's obviously had a hugely successful career, but I think as someone who's quite involved in the RTPI, I personally have seen the sort of profile of the RTPI has really been raised since Victoria joined. She's really passionate about young planners. She always makes time for young planners, which is really important. Obviously, she's really focused on diversity, which is another plus that I think we've all been rooting for a while. And I just think the way that she's not afraid to kind of stand up for planners and promote all of the good that planners do. And as we were discussing before, kind of going against that negative rhetoric that we've seen a lot from the media and the government. I think that's obviously a really good role model for young planners, particularly female young planners. And I think, Sue, you and Victoria have been a really great pair. Like, I think you work really well together, and certainly your presence on things like LinkedIn has been really prominent. I hope you can't hear my daughter screaming in the background. I'm really sorry, she is downstairs, but I can hear her quite loudly, so I hope that won't be picked up. So I would love to invite Victoria. Yeah, another inspirational quote there. Sylvia Law, I mainly picked her because she was the first female president of the RTPI, and after 60 years, she finally, we had a female president, so I had to include her really. She also started her career at Kent County Council, and as a Kent girl, I felt like she had to make my list. And she was instrumental in policies that protected Kent from urban sprawl. So I'm very grateful to her, but she was involved in kind of protecting a lot of the beautiful green areas around where I live. She was really into environmental policies. Was on the board for involved in setting up the Countryside Recreation Research Advisory Group, which really put recreation at the heart of a lot of policies in a way that it hadn't necessarily been included before. So I think she would be a really interesting person to have there. I quite liked this quote as well, that was actually from her sort of president's speech at, I can't remember the name of the first speech that you do as a president, but she said, "I find people look to me for a women's point of view, and perhaps I have one, but that is for others to judge," which I thought was quite clever and quite a nice approach, as at the time she was, I did write down the statistics somewhere, I think it was, there were 4,500 qualified practitioners of planning in the profession at the time, and just 243 were women. So at that point, she was quite unique as a female in the industry. So well done to her for paving the way for the rest of us. Patrick Abercrombie. I mainly included him because no one else had, and I felt like he had been quite a key part of shaping the planning profession as it is now. There's obviously so many elements of our planning system that he fed into, some positive, some not so positive, but I think there would just be so many areas that we could discuss with him. The Abercrombie plan obviously was kind of shaped the new towns movement. He was instrumental in getting the green belt in place around London, which has really kind of shaped the southeast. So I would like to have a chat with him really about some of the ups and downs of his career. And finally, I've included Rory Joyce, who wins an award for probably having the most letters after his name, being a chartered town planner, chartered surveyor, chartered environmentalist, and chartered accountant. He was former president of the Planning and Development Division of the RICS. He does loads with the Oxford Joint Planning Law Conference Committee, but I've mainly picked him not so much for a particular project that he's worked on, although he has been involved in some pretty major schemes, but he's a much admired uncle that really helped me get into the profession and really inspired me when I was kind of deciding whether or not this was a career that I wanted to go into. So I think I was 15 when he first took me in to do work experience, and I'm really grateful for how he's kind of shaped my career. But he's also really great fun. So I feel like at a dinner party, as well as being a total academic and you know having a lot of interesting intellectual comments to throw in there, he would also really liven up any party because he's a really great guy. So that was my last person. Oh, I missed his quote, but he's really in favour of kind of supporting junior planners and you know appreciates that we're the planners of tomorrow, and so puts time into us, which obviously I think is a really good thing.
Brilliant, thanks very much, Harriet. I think that's sort of a theme from all of your choices there, that they've sort of strong women or leading the profession or change the profession in some sort of way, and also encouraging the next generation. Does anyone have any questions on Harriet's? Would like to know a bit more? No? Okay.
Have I got rid of sharing my screen?
Yeah, you have.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will say I'd love to know a bit more, but we've got to see what the rest of the guests are.
Yeah, maybe we should keep the questions to the end.
Yeah. Suzi?
Yeah, let me quickly figure out how I'm going to share my screen and make it all work properly. Right, can you all see mine?
Brilliant, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so my first guest at my dream dinner party is Rory Reeves. She is a fellow of the RTPI, and she would readily be described as an academic. So the main reason why I've chosen Rory is just for the sheer work that she's done in actually researching into the role of women in planning. And obviously women in planning has been a big movement in recent years, and one that I've been actively involved in with the South Midlands branch. And Rory is a name which I keep coming back to with anything that I do when I'm doing the Thought Exchange initiative, which is, you know, actually trying to give voices to people, and her name keeps popping up, and so I really want to hear what her thoughts are, how things have changed. Obviously, you know, she was around at the time where women were starting to, you know, really get into the profession, and you started to see an uplift in the numbers. So I think she would have a really, really interesting perspective on what's wrong now and how things have changed and what more we could do. My second guest would be Helen Fadeep. So recently BAME Planners was launched, and I feel really strongly that the planning profession needs to do a hell of a lot better than what we are doing now. If I just give some stats for you and why I personally feel quite strongly about this. So in the UK, the population of BAME the population is circa 14%. In Milton Keynes, it's close to 30%. And if I look at the planners I know in Milton Keynes, and I'd like to consider I have an extensive network in Milton Keynes now, I'd say maybe 2% are from BAME backgrounds. And I don't think that's acceptable in any way. I think that when you look who the built environment is supposed to serve, you need to serve everyone, and you need to have that diversity of opinion and thought. So I think Helen would be a great guest to see how she thinks that we should be moving forward. You know, from my involvement in women in planning, you know, I think that outreach work is so important, and it's, you know, it's what more we can do, what more I can do personally. And so I think she'd be a really strong voice for not just me, but she'd be great for anyone to have at her dinner party. So my next guest is Ellie Gingle, who is the RTPI South East Chair, and she is a principal planner at WIG in Milton Keynes. So Ellie has been chosen as a dinner party guest because I want it to be a success, and I think that she'd be a great way of gelling everyone together. She'd be amazing at facilitating conversation and debate. So Ellie is kind of my alter ego, and I said that quite weirdly, but so we're both from Milton Keynes. We both went to the same secondary school, which was a very, very large school. We then went to the same university, the same college, and then we both became planners. So she has a really interesting similarity to me in many ways, and her opinion and her perspective on Milton Keynes is something I find really interesting to talk about with her. She's been a really big influence on my career to date. She's got me involved in women in planning, the RTPI, and so she's one of those people where I think she'd add so much to the discussion. And and it's very well linked to my next guest, and I think she'd also have a lot to say on it. But Ebenezer Howard would be my fourth guest. So I doubt there's a single person that's done a master's course which hasn't heard of Ebenezer Howard, famous for the Garden City movement and trying to reimagine how we create places, and widely quoted as being a big influence on a lot of the new towns. Now, being from Milton Keynes, some would argue that there was inspiration drawn from the Garden City movement. I think some would also say it might be a bastardization of the Garden City movement. But I think it would be so interesting to get his perspective, you know, have a chat to him. This is what Milton Keynes is like. Maybe tell him some of the weird stuff like our little pods which do food deliveries and just go along our redways, the linear parks, etc. So I think it would be so interesting to hear his perspective on what is a different interpretation on his kind of original ideas. And my final guest is India Chard. She is the planning apprentice in my team, and she started in December. And she's just started her master's part-time at Birmingham. Now, my team did all laugh at me when I said India would be one of my dream dinner party guests. And I probably made the mistake of saying her first in my list. But when I went on to say the rest of the names in the list, she then remarked, "Oh, I have to write an essay on Ebenezer Howard." And that was quite poignant to me in the sense that when I first started as a planner, you know, what was so fundamental for me was going along to things, meeting people, talking and shadowing those senior colleagues, you know, to name drop someone, David Bainbridge, you know, he took me along, he got me involved in the discussion, you know, it was so fundamental in shaping how I think about planning and actually the direction I wanted to take moving forward. So I thought I can't have this opportunity to have all these amazing people before me and not bring India along. So I said, no, India makes my list just because I think it's really important. And, you know, we're seeing that in the RTPI now with the big push for planning apprenticeships. So those are my 5 guests.
Thank you, Suzi. I really do like how you've included India in your selection, and also you highlighted some really important statistics that obviously as young planners we need to be saying them more and making it more known around the world so we can then make a difference. So thanks for that. Nick, on to your 5 dinner party guests.
Perfect. Let me just see. Is that sharing?
Yes.
Perfect. I've gone a bit, I don't think my dinner party is going to be particularly polite, if that makes sense. I've gone more for debate. So my first one is Le Corbusier, sort of controversial figure, I know, and not a planner in the strictest sense, as it appears that none of my choices are. Though I think his impact on our profession is not entirely a positive one, but it's definitely something that's been there for the past 50 years and is a legacy we still live with, especially his machine for living, culminating in his ideas of unité de habitation. I must say I have a penchant for brutalist architecture and utopian ideals, which will kind of be borne out in my next picks as well. But I do get that the hand of God syndrome might not have been so great, but I do think sort of the radical thinking that came around post-war and the sort of time of crisis, we're sort of living through that now. Again, though it won't be big estates, we're going to be revolutionary. So I think it'd be good to have him at the dinner table. My next pick, well, these are a few slides, obviously. Moscow and Paris. I don't think you can really tell the difference. Le Corbusier is best. My next pick are the Smithsons. So key to brutalism within the UK and in the British context. Very strangely similar to Le Corbusier, but also rather different, considering how they saw their work as a compassionate reaction to Le Corbusier, with his big tower blocks, their preference for a sort of slab block construction, and also the difference between internal and external walkways, their streets in the sky. So I think there could be some nice debate there. I'm not sure. I've counted them as one as well. I have to make that clear. One single guess, just because their work is so intimately together. So I've cheated slightly there. My next slide is Baron Haussmann. This is really mainly for his impact on sort of a bureaucratic nature and political form of planning, obviously existing before planning profession was really truly a profession. But I think out of all my picks, he's had the longest impact on a city, and it's a legacy we're still living with today in Paris and predominates Paris. But I've also put him in there because of Le Corbusier's plans for Paris. I'd suspect he wouldn't be too pleased with how he chose to destroy much of it. So I thought that would generate some interest and debate around the table. My next one, and a bit different to all my others, is Christopher Charles Benninger, considering that he's still alive. So that would make the invite slightly easier to send out. I picked him largely because he works predominantly outside the European context, mainly in Asia, and his ideas of his 10 principles of intelligent urbanism, particularly in Thimphu and Bhutan, sort of leading us into the 21st century. This idea of needing environmental sustainability, heritage conservation, appropriate technology, placemaking, social success, all of these things that previously may have been overlooked or not quite considered in their fullest. He brings around this. And I also think he brings, once again, Le Corbusier and his work in Chandigarh. I think he brings a different perspective that may be a bit challenging. And yeah, someone that's a bit more current could give a fuller debate, if that makes sense. And this is his plan for Thimphu. My final one is Ron Heron, because I had a fear that it could get a bit dull quite quickly with the planners that I'd picked, maybe a bit dour and frosty. So Ron Howard's ideas for a walking city seem to be the sort of counterpoint and sort of the culmination of a machine for living, literally a city that walks around in a post-apocalyptic world, trying to pick up resources. But definitely someone that's like that, I think, who came up with that is going to be a fun time at a dinner party, and maybe calm down the rest of the guests as they argue over who's got the best ideas. So yeah, they're my 5.
Thanks, Nick. You've definitely gone for the most contrasting dinner party so far. Brilliant.
Yeah. Maybe a bit too raucous.
Yeah. You'd have to be there to, calm it down as well as a facilitator. We'll hear from Annabel next.
Right, can you see my slide? Yeah.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. So although I'm not actually from Milton Keynes, I do now reside here. But the first time I actually came to Milton Keynes was whilst on my Sheffield Hallam University BA Human Geography course. And we took a long, harrowing coach journey down the M1 and came to visit this brilliant new town, exploring some of the more older traditional elements of the grid squares and the more modern developments. And really, I chose to pick Fred Roach, one of the leading members of the Milton Keynes Town Development Corporation, because that really started my involvement in Milton Keynes, actually understanding the new town concept and his breath of life that really went into what we call Milton Keynes today. I mean, he lived and breathed literally Milton Keynes. I was reading a passage from his daughter's memoirs earlier, and then moving in and seeing this new town develop around them, and really being inspired by that. And I think he died actually relatively young, and would be really interested if I could bring him back to the party, back to life, and to see what Milton Keynes has become. And particularly one of the passages from his daughter's memories of him was about how in 1979 the shopping centre, which is now a listed building actually, and quite controversially so, he would walk through there and pick up any discarded litter and pop it in the bin, and she would always find this quite amusing, because he would act so horrified that anyone would disrespect such a beautiful building, and something he'd clearly worked with many other architects to bring as a centrepiece for Milton Keynes. And whether you again love or hate brutalism, which it does take aspects of, it's still quite iconic, and so I would love for him to be there. Almost in slight contrast, although not completely, Jane Jacobs was my next choice. I feel that her view of ensuring and respecting city dwellers and their views would actually be quite well fostered in some respects in Milton Keynes, although we don't have many residents living in the heart of Milton Keynes, and actually it's something that is quite an issue, and which is being improved upon all the time, whether you like tall buildings or not. Many more flat blocks are being built in the centre to breathe some life into Milton Keynes, and I think Fred and herself would have quite a contrasting views. Fred having been involved with when Milton Keynes was meant to only be a few stories high as a maximum, and now seeing 18-storey buildings coming in to breathe in that life of city dwellers. And interestingly, I was reading earlier about a passage: take a look at Coventry or Milton Keynes or any of the standard results of the planning mentality in Britain, and you will encounter just the disaster that Jacobs foretold. Empty centres, lonely suburbs, ugly high-rises, and streets that have lost their eyes, their lungs and their souls, and the motor car in charge. Now, I think that's probably quite an extreme view of maybe how Jane Jacobs would see Milton Keynes, in my opinion. However, I'd certainly like to hear from her on that point. That was a commentator imagining what she would think. So moving on to a slightly different tone and slightly less Milton Keynes focus for a moment, was Gavin Parker, my next choice. Having met him a number of times now and spoken with him about planning for communities, I think he'd really add to the dinner party his reflections on post-Skeffington and what we've taken from the Skeffington report, or maybe a call to action for more work in planning and engaging with communities. I think he has a really interesting viewpoint that he put forward particularly well at the Nathaniel Litchfield lecture previously, and continues to do so. I also think, interestingly, he has recently become the chair of the New Forest National Park Authority, and I think in this new hat he would again have quite different views about a very different part of the country to Milton Keynes, which would have been the focus of conversation if I maybe didn't bring someone else in. So I certainly think Gavin would be valuable. And then you've seen this name before, you know her very well, I'm sure, Eleanor, or Ellie Gingell, chosen for sort of similar reasons to Suzi, in the sense of her being an inspirational female planner and having worked with her directly myself. But also more for me in this context, having the community's experience working on neighbourhood plans for quite some time, and in the local authority sector. I think she would have some really interesting views to pull from that experience. And I also think she is quite willing to challenge your views and her own views. Whenever working with her, she doesn't just settle on gut instinct. She might have that, but then actually continues to grow her views in planning by the evidence that's around her, and really does seek to ensure that other people on projects do the same, and come out of their sort of box and their comfort zone a bit with their viewpoints, and kind of ensure that diversity in planning, even if myself and her are maybe not the most diverse two people to work on a project, that we actually do think about that context and bring that to work. So I think she'd be great. And finally, a little bit of a curveball, because she's not known for being a planner, and rather known for being a stand-up and television comedian, is Catherine Ryan. She did actually train in planning. Her degree was in planning at Ryerson University in Toronto, which not all of you may know, but she didn't quite apply it. She now generally has quite feminist output actually in her comedy, and I think a lot of social critic, which whilst might not be planning per se, I think is inspired probably by her planning roots. And I think, as well as being probably a light-hearted guest in many respects, I think she would have quite important views about the way that all different members of societies are represented in planning and in our cities, and I think that she'd be quite a good addition to our table, and breathe in some of that humour that everyone likes at a good dinner party.
Thanks, Annabel. I was wondering how you were going to get Catherine Ryan into the planning link. That's brilliant. I think her and Ellie would definitely bounce off each other a lot. Thanks very much for that. And on to Simon now.
Okay, all up? Yeah, good. So Sir Raymond Unwin is my first invitee. He demonstrated during the Great War the principles of building homes rapidly and economically, whilst also maintaining satisfactory standards. I mean, it's the root of planning, and actually something, as we head into this period of accelerated building and so on and so forth, somebody whose thoughts I find very interesting, somebody who's been there and done it and built out accelerated while thinking of all the things that planners need to think about: family privacy, internal spaces. The things that he did in between the war periods, I think, reflects to some degree the things that we still think about now, and having that kind of perspective from then till now, I think would be a great thing. He took part in the creation of Letchworth, so he's got that garden city kind of background, again something very current. Designed the villages of Gretna and Eastriggs and supervised others, so he's done it as well. So, and the president of the Royal Town and Planning Institute, 1915 to 1916, so some time ago. But he was somebody that I felt that had built in the way that you need to plan correctly, and did it at pace, and certainly somebody that I would want to invite. Just need to think. My next one, Margaret Filman. She was Perth's first female town planner. She was an architect and a landscape designer, but she was the founding member of the Western Australia Town Planning Institute. And you'll see this through all of my guests. I'm always inclined to look at first principles and people that were pioneers and went in and did it and were the first people to do it, because you learn the most, when you're at the cutting edge, I believe. And these are all people that were at the cutting edge. And Margaret particularly engaged in substantial public speaking, and she was really keen on trying to educate the public. And I think educate might be a bit strong, but she was really looking to increase the awareness of how important planning is. And for me, that's a key part of what all planners should be doing, pointing out and pushing out there how important the planning process is for our futures and our present. And again, she's done it. She's planned a town site in Australia for 25,000 people. She's done it in practice. And again, she took a role setting up the Register of National Estate and supporting the introduction of heritage conservation studies. She was somebody that looked to make sure that people were really aware and had the ability to learn and develop these kind of ideas to make sure that the planners of the future and indeed the public of the present really understood the value of planning. So that's why I'd invite Margaret for sure. Moving on to Kevin Lynch. he was known for his perceptual form of urban environments and was an early proponent of mental mapping. And this is something I've been working on quite a lot recently, and something, again, that has stood the test of time and is still very current in its application to planning. He was about how people interact with their landscapes, a key element of planning. And he came up with essentially 5 elements of how people interact with place, paths, streets, sidewalks, then the edges, the perceived boundaries. We talk about urban sprawl quite a lot. He was looking at these key principles, from the very beginning, the elements of different districts, nodes, and then landmarks, readily identifiable objects. So he really sort of understood how places interacted with people on a very immediate level, how people navigated around places, how different places impacted different people in different ways. And I think that's a key part of planning. And he had, those very first kind of thoughts of how they interact. So again, first principles, I felt that he would be a real benefit to the dinner party. And then George Kessler, very experienced, 41-year career, 200 projects, 26 communities. He's somebody that has done it. And again, very early on in planning, and he wrote that the planning should be comprehensive. Even though a grand urban design could be realised in bits and pieces and over a long period of years, still we should always know where we are going. And in fact, I don't think we've still got there as a planning profession. I don't think that our time horizons are long enough. And I think his perspectives on what comprehensive planning is, would be a real benefit to some lively discussion for sure. He recognised that planning has got to be relevant to its geography, its economic character, that when we plan, we have to tailor our approach to specific circumstances, and this was at the time the first thoughts of these kind of elements of planning. And he said there comes a time when development must be subject to control, when further growth must be planned such that urbanisation will no longer proceed at the expense of devastating nature. And the reason I included that quote, because it takes me on to my last guest. And my last guest isn't a planner. He's a scientist, he's an environmentalist, he's a futurist, but he's my absolute hero, to be honest. And everything that I do from planning, and again, these kind of first principles of what makes up a planner, all comes from James Lovelock. I've put in here in the bullet points, he's a genius. I don't know if that is substantiated, but to me, he certainly is. He came up with the Gaia hypothesis, which many people may be aware of. And it's about systems, and it's about how he looked at how people and the environment interact. I mean, he first looked at how the environment interacts with itself, and then led on to, well, what happens if we put extra things into this? And he, to me, comes up with the absolute evidence-based backed sustainability argument, which is interesting because he feels that the time is past for sustainable development, actually. And I trust him. I do trust him. And he thinks that actually development is no longer sustainable, and we're looking at a retreated sustainable development area. So what he believes is, and it's coming true, we have to think much more widely about places and people and how they interact. He was talking a number of years ago about abandoning Bangladesh because of coastal flooding issues. We're already seeing emerging in UK policy the fact that we're talking about relocating whole communities away from areas at threat from coastal change. He saw this years ago and said, actually, as planners, we need to be thinking bigger. We need to be thinking about what do we need to do to make sure that we have a sustainable future for our children. If we're going to plan the world James Lovelock is the person that I'd want at my dinner table to discuss that, to be honest. And just for interest, as I say, James Lovelock is my hero. He also came up with the first device that monitored CFCs in the atmosphere. He's come up with algae that helps reverse climate change. He is a sustainability hero, and I would certainly encourage any planners that aren't aware of him to invite them to his dinner parties. At 101, he is still writing. So yeah, certainly would love to have him at my dinner party. And that's my 5. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. I mean, I love your passion. I just love it, and I think you're so right. And you know, they are cutting edge planners, and a lot of what they've said years ago we need to be doing now and translating that into action. So yeah, thanks very much for sharing that. Sue, do you have any questions you'd like to ask on that? Lots of people mentioned.
Absolutely wowed, because you've got some of my top role models there as well amongst the mix. But actually, you know something, if I was going to have a dinner party, I'd want you lot there. I really would, because you've got that mix. You can talk about all these people, they're behind you, but wow, what a discussion we'd actually have. And I think they were absolutely superb choices. But can I now just throw it back? Laura, who would you bring? You can't get away with it.
No, I know. I did think, you know, I didn't prepare a presentation, but I think for me, one person I would have is definitely Patsy Healy. I've actually worked with her on a neighbourhood plan, and she was just so inspiring the way she got communities engaging. So it was a way of, we went into schools and so we would set them homework and do the parents, because obviously parents aren't usually the ones who have the time sort of maybe when to go to these public events. And it was brilliant, the response we got back. So I would love to have her at a dinner party. And I think also just like role model for me in my career is probably Lucy Seymour Bowdry. Obviously just on the trustee, she is obviously my mentor, and I just find her, all the work that she does in MHCLG, and just talking to her as a friend about confidence and public speaking, it's just, I really do admire her for that. So I think they're my 2 on the spot.
They are 2 brilliant ones. I think Patsy Healy is absolutely fantastic. She's really up there, isn't she? And I think the point that you were just making about engaging with young people, that's recently come out in a study published this week, whereby I think they said something like 82% of young people had wanted to be engaged in the future of their community and planning and hadn't been. And so there's so much that we can actually do. And I think you're just, the 6 of you, just great role models. And I'd love to have dinner with you. Let's make that happen.
Yeah, when we can all meet up.
Yeah, let's hope that happens in the future.
Definitely. Brilliant. Well, I think we've sort of run out of time now, unfortunately, for any more questions. But I'd just like to raise a glass and thank Sue Manns for coming as our time, and also just cheers to the future young planners.
Future, and hope we get together at post.